appreciate everyone's patience. Good morning, brothers and sisters. The reason why we kind of work to get this up is obviously from the title Early Christian Art. That's really not something that I can, verbally tell you. It works much better if there are, some pictures, obviously. So, Phil, thank you very much. I will email this to you in the future so we don't have to use my 1985 Commodore 64. All right, so I'm actually very excited to give this presentation. It should probably take, 3 weeks or so, something like that. In the past, we've done some studies on the Acts of the Apostles and the spreading of Christianity very early on after the death of Christ and the Apostle Paul and the other apostles kind of, spreading the message. Art has always been, since civilization, a foundation of society, and has been a way for people to express different ideas. And the early Christians were no different. And so I'd like to take a look at how the early Christians, particularly in Rome and some other places, how they expressed their beliefs through art. Because there's, particularly in the catacombs, as we're going to see, there is a lot of art that has been preserved from this time period. It's not fantastic art, but it's art nonetheless, and it conveys a certain message, particularly to those people that were kind of dealing with persecution in the Roman Empire. So I'm not gonna give you too much background. We'll get into it right now. I'm probably going to talk today, probably about 15, 20 minutes or so, kind of just get the ball rolling, and we'll continue on from there, okay? This picture right here, if you see it right here, is from one of the catacombs in Rome. There's several catacombs in Rome. Has anyone ever been to the catacombs? Walked through the catacombs? Okay, well, we do have some pretty cool pictures of that. But this fresco, which the majority of these art paintings, I guess you could call them, but they are frescoes. And this is right here, Jesus and the apostles. I do want you to just kind of, as we progress in this study, I want you to just keep in the back of your mind how Christian art is going to change from very early on, right, when they had to meet in the catacombs because of persecution. We're going to go all the way up to like 1000 AD, okay? So we're really going to cover 1,000 years of art history. I'm very interested in it. Maybe you guys will be interested in it. I'd love your feedback afterward. Like, yeah, Brother Rich, this is really good stuff. Or, it's possible. I don't know. But here's Jesus and the disciples. He's preaching, right? And so just kind of keep that in mind. You have, Jesus looks relatively young here, right? He also doesn't have a beard, which is another sign of youth, all right? As we go on in the next few weeks, let's see how the interpretation of Jesus changes as Christianity spreads, as Christianity becomes, mainstream in Roman society. And then we're going to see how Jesus changes, once after the Council of Nicaea or the Edict of Milan, where Christianity becomes legal and then eventually becomes the state religion under Constantine. Wow, we're going to have a really big change in how Jesus is portrayed and how the church is portrayed as well. And there's reasons for that, obviously. Okay? Sound good? All right, let's do it. All right, so we know a lot of this stuff, but it is good to kind of just talk about, some of the background associated with early Christian art. We know that Christianity started in the 1st century. We know all the story because we're very familiar with the Acts of the Apostles, right? Jesus is going to die. He's going to be raised. He's going to be crucified. He's going to be raised the 3rd day. And eventually he's going to be taken up into heaven. And his apostles are given the task to go into the world, right, and preach the gospel. And this is what's going to happen. Traditionally, the apostles are going to go to different parts of the world. But probably the most important, as far as preaching the gospel is going to be the Apostle Paul, right? He's going to go out through the Roman world and preach in all kinds of different cities, and he's going to bring this message of the gospel everywhere where he goes. And he is going to end up being in Rome as well, along with Peter. It was persecuted very early on, and the reason why it was persecuted was because early Christians would not worship Caesar as a god. They wouldn't offer incense, they wouldn't bow, they wouldn't sacrifice, excuse me, to Caesar, because they said, hey, Jesus is our Lord, right? And we're not bowing down to anybody else. And so for about 250 years, Christians are going to be persecuted. Sometimes it's a very small persecution. Throughout that 250 years, sometimes there's relatively times of peace as well, where Christians can't openly practice their religious beliefs, but privately they did quite a bit, and we'll get into that. But people kind of left him alone a lot of times. I don't want you guys to think that there was only one religion in the Roman world, by the way. There were thousands of different religions and sects and cults and stuff like that in the Roman Empire. The ancient world was a very religious place, and so people just looked at Christianity as an offshoot of Judaism, like, oh, this is a sect of Judaism, right? Early day Christians were associated with the Jews for a long period of time, and we'll get into that as well. Because of this, they're going to need two things, right? Number one, they're going to need a place to worship, which is going to start in people's homes, right? They're going to be called home ecclesias or home churches, where small groups of people would come together in somebody's home, usually someone that was wealthy, that actually had a large home that could keep people in there, and that's where they would meet for the breaking of bread, for communion, for to hear the exhortations, to hear the readings, that type of thing. Okay, and we'll get into kind of some of the rituals of the early Christians and how they had their meeting. It's really fascinating, like some of the stuff. All right, any questions so far on this background stuff? All right, this picture right here, obviously, this is a picture later on. I think this is around 550 AD. And again, this is a picture of Jesus. Kind of recall the first picture that we had, right? There's some differences now, right? Jesus, he looks a little sterner, looks a little older. I think he's got a cross on the back here, right? He's bigger than everybody else, okay? So just kind of keep that in mind. What's that? That's a great point, Judy. Yeah, so this is actually taken from Constantinople, which would be the Eastern Orthodox Church, which would be the Greek Orthodox. And you're going to see some of those differences in art as well. There's going to be a period of time under the Byzantine Empire that they're going to take over all of the Mediterranean as well, and their art is going to follow with them. So you have some of this Byzantine type of art that's also... do you want me to... Phil, you want to use this? Okay. That's also going to find its way into Italy as well, and we'll take a look at that. All right. That good, Phil? Okay, let's talk briefly right now about Roman art and Greek art, okay? As you can see up here, there's a couple, famous sculptures as well. But the Greeks and the Romans were really about presenting their art in a very realistic way, particularly statues and also paintings. If you look at a lot of the paintings and the sculptures that are from the Roman and the Greek world, they're very action-oriented, right? And so you can see, I forget which one of this is. It's one of there's a serpent. He's fighting off the serpent right here along with his two sons. His sons are going to be, I forget the Greek myth. Anyways, you can see like the muscle tension. It's really amazing that a sculpture can do this, right? You can see the muscle tension here. He's struggling. Now over here, this is a statue of a dying Celt, right? And you can see he's about to die, but you can see kind of the tone of the body. It's very realistic. All right? And so they're going to emphasize beauty, grace, godlike perfection, and realism. This is what the Romans and Greeks liked when they made art. Okay? They want to be realistic. You're going to see with the early Christian art, they weren't really concerned. In fact, they weren't concerned at all about presenting a beautiful body, because that isn't where the early Christians were, what they were all about. They weren't about the body. They weren't about, showcasing how big or strong or fast or powerful you were. Their hearts and their minds were in a different direction. And that was all about their spiritual life, about being delivered from harm, that type of thing, okay? And so their art is going to be very simplistic. And that's one reason, right? They're trying to portray a higher level of thinking on a spiritual level, all right? This does not mean that we take away from kind of the beauty of these statues. They're beautiful. They're works of art. They're wonderful. But the early Christians were not into that. Here's some other examples right here. This one in the middle is actually pretty interesting. I don't know if you can see it. Incredible detail of a wild boar hunt. This gentleman right here is stabbing a boar that is being attacked by dogs, stabbing it, and you can see kind of all the chaos that's going on. They actually still do this, by the way. I went down a YouTube rabbit hole about hunting wild boars with dogs, and they still do this. They send these dogs out. First, they send the smaller dogs out to kind of harry the boar and tire him out. A couple, smaller dogs. And then once they have the boar cornered, they send in the bigger dog. And what he does, he goes in and just crashes into this boar and bites on his ear. And the other dogs bite on the ear, and they don't let him go. And it's just this, and they wear bulletproof vests, by the way, these dogs. So the boar can't, stab them with their tusks, very sharp tusks. So yeah, I learned something. But anyways, you can see the detail in a lot of this stuff. Like, wow, look over here on the right, a picture of a noble woman. Look at the detail in her hair, right? And very early on in the Christian art world, I guess you could say. First of all, they're being done in the catacombs, right? All right, so not the best place for frescoes and for paintings. But they weren't concerned about this. They weren't concerned about the detail of making something beautiful. All right, any questions, comments so far? All right. Okay, some other examples of Roman art here. You can see the realism. A lot of bright colors, right? You can see a lot of bright colors. They're usually about everyday life, scenes of everyday life. And what would happen was, a very wealthy family that had one of these great Roman villas would hire an artist. And they would come in, or a group of artists, and they would come in and they would do all the walls in a fresco like this, beautiful colors. And you can see a lot of them. One of the places that really preserved a lot of this stuff was Pompeii. And that was really by accident, because remember, all of that ash came in and just kind of buried Pompeii exactly as it was and preserved it. And so when they excavated it and took out all of that rubble and stuff, they had these beautiful walls, and they still had the beautiful pigment of the different colors in them. So we have a really good idea of the frescoes that were painted by the early Romans. We're going to see the early Christians are going to do the same thing. Okay? All right, so let's talk about the catacombs. The catacombs come from the Latin word catatumbus, and it means among the tombs. And so let's just talk a little bit about, kind of Roman burial practices. The tombs started actually before the Romans. A group of people called the Etruscans around 800 BC, right around the time of Solomon, probably a little later than Solomon. So in Israel, Solomon's reigning, and Asa and Rehoboam, that type of thing. During that time in Italy, a group of people called the Etruscans. They predated the Romans, and they had different customs and that type of thing. They would bury their dead. The Romans, on the other hand, did not bury their dead. They cremated their dead. All right? And so what they would do is they would cremate their dead and then keep the urn in a special place in the house, usually by the house altar that they would have to their gods as a remembrance. As it changed, the Romans began to burn their bodies, the bodies of their dead, but not completely, which is interesting, right? Like half-burnt bodies are like the bones and maybe some, not to get too graphic. But they would then take this somewhat burnt body and bury that. And so as Rome grew and as this practice grew, they needed more and more space to bury their dead. The catacombs were not in the city proper. The catacombs were outside of the city, okay, because it was against Roman law to bury people within the city. And so these catacombs were outside of the ancient walls of Rome. All right? Now, Jews and early day Christians buried their dead. They didn't burn their dead. They didn't cremate their dead. And I've heard actually some brothers that kind of, have, kind of talked against cremation, that type of thing. But they didn't cremate their dead because they believed in the resurrection, right? And they wanted the body whole to be, resurrected, that type of thing. That was their thinking. And so the Christians, early day Christians, and the Jews, by the way, used the catacombs for their burial. And so this is going to evolve to where the Christians now aren't just burying their dead, but they're actually going down into these catacombs actually to practice their religious beliefs. And as they went down to decorate the tombs, they began to kind of decorate them with pictures or frescoes having to do with biblical events and also events from the gospel, the four gospels as well, and the life of Christ. And so you can see how the catacombs are laid out, kind of stacked one another on the other. This is very like volcanic ash that is very easy to kind of chisel or break up or whatever, but it also becomes very hard afterward. So if you do it at the right time, you can really get in there and make all of these things, but then they kind of harden very quickly. And so you can see kind of all the inlets there, one stacked upon the other, and they would take these bodies, they would be wrapped up, and then they would be put into their, little slot, all right? And so this kind of seems a little freaky to us, right? Like, going down to the catacombs with all the dead people. Didn't bother these guys at all. Just part of life. In fact, how this started as well, some of the martyrs, the early Christian martyrs that were killed for their beliefs, whether they were beheaded or burnt or in some cases thrown to the wild beasts, they were venerated as martyrs. And so they would be buried here, and people wanted to be buried close to the martyrs as well because, eventually they're going to, people are going to feel as if these martyrs' remains had some kind of, like spiritual power, that type of thing. All right. Again, just another picture of the catacombs, right? So just imagine, like, hey, we're going to Sunday meeting. We'll meet at the catacombs, right? But they had to do that because, if they publicly, told everyone, hey, we're a practicing Christian, they would be killed by the Romans. Okay, it's against the law, and so I think it just talks to the faith of these early day believers, right? That even though they were being persecuted, even though that they could be killed at any moment, they still found a way to, number one, come together as a group, right? And number two, to practice their belief system. All right? Questions, comments on this? All right. So there are 60 different catacombs. This will be our last slide. There are 60 different catacombs in and around Rome. I think we talked about this. They carved into the volcanic rock by slaves. And so there's 3 different phases of art which are in the catacombs, all right? It's the early phase. They're just getting started. There's several different paintings like that. Then the Old Testament, and then the New Testament. So the stories of the Old Testament are going to be painted first, and then comes the stories of the New Testament as well. And we find examples of this all over. Thousands of different examples, by the way, brothers and sisters, of early Christian art. Began as a burial place particularly for martyrs. Early Christians wanted to be buried near martyrs. This evolved into rituals and services being held underground. And so this is kind of the background and where we're going. I have several examples for next week of these different types of art, what they represented. And I think we can gain an excitation, brothers and sisters, from these early believers of their faith. It really is, it's a powerful example of individuals that were put under tremendous pressure and stress, but still maintain their beliefs, still maintain their faith. And because of that, we have the gospel message today because these people held on to it, even though they had to go down into the catacombs to worship God. All right? We had a very short